Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for the second event in our fall programming series, Freedom and Captivity. The series is co-organized by Catherine Vesteman, Professor of Anthropology, Chandra Bimmel, Chair of the African American Studies Program and Professor of Anthropology, and myself, Gwen Shanks, in the Theater and Dance Department. I want to begin by acknowledging that I am located on territory stewarded by the Wabanaki Confederacy. We recognize and honor the current tribes who comprise the Confederacy, the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Micmac peoples who have stewarded this land for generations. We recognize and support their efforts for land and water protection and restoration, and for cultural healing and recovery in the wake of ongoing settler colonialism. Freedom and Captivity, supported by the Center for Arts and Humanities at Colby College, explores a set of interrelated questions. What does it mean to be free? What forms can liberation take? And how do we articulate and enact an abolitionist vision now? We have been deeply inspired and moved by the work of a number of artists who center these questions and others in their own practices. Tonight, we are joined by Anna Martine Whitehead, who works in and across performance, as they have written their, quote, work is a transgression on the field of dance, inspired by and inhabiting the practices and feelings of high school dance parties and queer clubs. Their artist talk this evening will explore how they center Black liberation, queer livingness, and creative alternatives to policing and prisons in their work by asking, quote, how do we move collectively in relation and opposition to mastery? Martine is an assistant professor of contemporary practice at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and a performance activist with Prison Plus Neighborhood Art Education Project, where they collaborate with movement workers inside and outside Stateville Correctional Center. While Martine will discuss specific projects in more depth in a moment, I want to share that their work has been supported by the MAP Fund, the Graham Foundation, and the Foundation for Contemporary Art. They've had residencies at the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, the University of Chicago, and the Headland Center for the Arts, amongst other places. Our program this evening will begin with a live artist talk with Martine. Following that, Martine will share a pre-recorded conversation that they had with the performance artist and poet Gabrielle Civil. We'll then come back together to answer questions from the audience. Throughout the program this evening, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box. Finally, before we begin Martine's artist talk, I want to thank all of the departments and programs across campus who have offered support for this series, and thank the Black School for their beautiful graphics, which you see on the slide right now. And with that, it is our very great pleasure to welcome Martine this evening.
Hey, thank you, Gwen. Thank you everyone at Colby, Gwen and Chandra and Catherine and the rest of the team, and especially Gwen for, I feel like you were like wrangling me for the last 6 months. So thank you for your persistence and patience. And also big thanks to the whole Freedom and Captivity initiative, which it's just so exciting to me, the whole project. Colby's partner in the project Beyond is just, I think, really forward thinking and hopefully very generative. So thank you all for inviting me to be a part. I am going to attempt to share my screen and then we will get it going. All right. So just to properly introduce myself, my name is Anna Martine Whitehead, and I'm coming to you from the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi nations, as well as the Miami, the Ho-Chunk, the Sauk, the Meskwaki, the Kickapoo, Peoria, and the Sioux nations. In response to the prompt that Colby gave me for this talk, which was this framing of what does abolition feel like, I was reminded of a lesson that we received from Chicago House in 1987 or 88 via rhythm control and Chuck Roberts, when Mr. Roberts said, some of you may remember this, when he said, "This is my house, and in my house, there's only house music." And then he said, "But I am not so selfish, because once you enter my house, it then becomes our house." He said, "You see, no one man owns this house. House is a feeling." And I was reminded of this especially while with Gabrielle Civil discussing our own experiences of teaching art, poetry, and dance inside prisons. The conversation is rambling, and you all will see it in a moment, but I think it gets to some of these deeper points that I'm trying to make in this talk. I'll only be able to share a portion of that conversation, but by the end, we are really getting into something that I think is key when we're talking abolition, and part of why I think this series is so crucial, because it can sometimes feel with abolition conversation that there is a there, which comes up in Gabrielle and I's convo. That this there is a place to which many of us don't belong, and which perhaps is so far away that most of us could never even hope to arrive. And so we get scared, right? Like we are trespassing, or maybe we feel like we have no right to these ideas in the first place. When in fact, the there is, as Timothy Morton would say, a hyper object. The hyper object in this case is the prison, or more broadly, the prison industrial complex. And it touches all of us. And precisely because it is so expansive, it can be difficult to see. But because what abolition wants to do is imagine and practice alternatives to the PIC, we need to be able to recognize it. We don't have to be able to see it. Vision is only one way of knowing, just as speech is only one way of naming. And we can practice other ways of knowing, listening, touching, and feeling. And we can hone these practices in the service of a future without prisons and police. I really believe that. I'll get into all of that as we go on, but what I'm trying to say right now is that we, and also I'm talking to myself here actually always throughout this talk, we don't have to be worried that we are not learned or active enough to be true abolitionists, because abolition is a practice. It is an action, any number of actions, in fact. It's an offering, and it's a feeling. It iterates if infinitely, and like Chuck Roberts said, it is owned by no one. Although he also named his house as his house, the place that he built and invested time and energy into. He said that it can become our house, but you have to enter it first, right? So the question is, and what I hopefully will try to speak to a little bit tonight, although I really don't actually have any answers, which is part of the point. And I have to call in Paula Giddings here to support me. The question is when and where and how do we enter this work? And I think that one way to answer this, or to get around an answer to this, is through feeling. So just stepping back for a moment, my parents' marriage directly descended from the Loving versus Virginia decision, which in 1967 outlawed any bans on interracial marriage, or what in some places is still called miscegenation. In 1976, my parents were married, and they moved from Pittsburgh to North Carolina just before my mom gave birth to my brother and then to me. And I've heard my mom, who grew up in St. Louis, tell the story several times of passing the Klan welcomes you to Durham County billboard on her way into North Carolina with my father. I was born in 1984, so not actually that long ago, I think. While my mother was pregnant with me, she got a phone call from a Klansman threatening her and her family if they didn't get out of town. They stayed, and I went on to have an obliviously happy childhood in Chapel Hill. But I can't imagine that experience in utero wasn't part of all the other experiences that shape who I am today. Going back to this idea of the hyper object, one way that Timothy Morton helps explain this is by talking about the concept of nature, quote unquote. In the West, many of us have been trained to think of nature as over there, a destination you go to and that you must preserve, which is outside of yourself. Because we don't think of ourselves and our cities as part of nature, we often fail to see how we plug into the ecology through pipelines, exhaust, wastewater, et cetera, and how our actions here impact there, because again, there is no there. In thinking about our deep entanglement with prisons and carceral logics, it's important to remember that we are also part of a vast ecology, and that ecology extends outwards in all directions through time. So I was reminded of this phone call with my mom that she received while I was in utero. This very violent phone call, which is directly tied to the history and present of policing and neighborhood watches and so forth. And how I then absorbed that, so that in utero, I've already become a part of the trans-temporal prison ecology. As I say, we can't always see these connections, and sometimes seeing them is the least useful way into knowing them. Some of the work that I personally do as both just a human being in the world and also a post-humanist person in the world and an abolitionist, and which I also do with my students, both at the School of the Art Institute and also at Stateville Prison, is to meditate and practice honing in on the different senses. So we do all this with our eyes closed, and we include the sense of sight with our eyes closed, which means that we kind of get to a place where we're able to perceive light and shadow as it falls across the backs of our eyelids. What invariably happens, and which you know if you've meditated, is a different type of awareness takes hold. You are in your body, and yet this awareness expands beyond the bodily. This awareness does not subscribe to visual laws of perspective, ideas of vanishing points, none of that stuff. There's a sense of the rhizome in this type of awareness. And it really gets to how important it is to me to not stop at sight. In fact, to understand deeply and intimately that visibility can do not only a violence to one's own awareness of what is really going on in the world, but also the very thing that one believes they are looking at. This is an image of a mind map that I made, I think, over a year ago, as I was thinking about the project that I'm currently working on, Force and Opera in 3 Acts, but essentially thinking about walls, border walls, prisons, and waiting rooms. So when I began designing elements of my opera, Force, which the story of the opera is that it follows a group of women and femmes who are all sort of versions of me as they wait to enter a prison and escape a memory erasing mold that's coming out of the toilet, which we can talk more about during Q&A if we want to. When I began designing this, I felt very strongly that the entire play space should be in one black box. Not so much like a theatrical black box, like those of you in performance know this concept of a black box theater. That's not actually what I mean. I actually mean a black box, like an actual black box on wheels, perceived by the audience in the round, in which the audience is then compelled to move throughout the play, which therefore forces the audience to be active participants in their own witnessing work, and which produces infinite obstructions. I haven't constructed it yet exactly as I imagined, but I've made some attempts with my designer, Sydney Lynn, and they help me get closer to what I'm talking about. This is it in the background here, and in front is Anayette playing keys in the opera. And this is a closer shot of the box with Angel Batuid playing clarinet inside the box. I want to go back now to this point about the violence that's done to the thing being seen, what I mentioned earlier. And we know this, right? As Black people, as queer and trans people as femmes, we intimately know the violence of the gaze and of surveillance. Even before we know it with our brains, we know it. As Stacey Haynes, the co-founder of Generative Somatics, teaches us, mental understanding alone is not the only way we have to understand our experience. Whether or not we've ever been approached by a cop or we spent a night in prison, that understanding, that somatic knowing, that being visible can mean our bodies don't belong to us and that our fates are not entirely our own. This is a feeling, knowing shared with folks inside and outside prisons everywhere. And we know that escaping surveillance can be a matter of life and death. We share that feeling, knowing with everyone inside, whether or not we've ever been inside ourselves. If we haven't spent any time inside, our feeling knowing might be less acute than those who have, or maybe differently acute if we've spent time in another carceral institution like a hospital. But we are nevertheless deeply already plugged into that carceral ecology. For the last couple of years, I've been playing with emergency blankets as kind of protective gear for self-emergence. They're, you know, if you run marathons, you usually put them on after the marathon, but they're actually, they were invented for astronauts by NASA. Which I think is just really great. And they're, you know, they're like 99 cents. They're so amazing. They're reflective. They trap body heat. You actually get very hot really quickly inside them. And also what's cool is that they reflect, right? Like this looks like looking at a mirror, but from inside you can see outside. So this image here is a picture of one of the 15-foot blankets I've been quilting in my studio. And I've found this like so healing, this work with these blankets. Whenever I feel stressed by harmful family members or being out in the street, in my body, or diversity and equity committees, or just general racism, I find it very helpful to go inside the blanket and take a few breaths. I feel very safe there. I feel invisible. I feel like no one can see me, and I feel connected to my own body. I think this is like a very simple way of trying to get to the point that I'm making, which has to do with the ways that we connect to these feelings that we inherently already know, which we share with folks all around us, including folks inside prison. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this emergence blanket idea through some video work, which I'll show now. And just to kind of give some context for this video, this is a piece. It exists as a piece, but it's also a work in progress piece that I produced while we've been working on this opera for the last couple of years, and really it comes very specifically out of lockdown time. So last year during the pandemic, and trying to find new ways to rehearse a piece with dancers that is about prison waiting rooms when we can't actually be in person. And so what we ended up doing was talking a lot about how being in prison makes us feel, and what the feeling of freedom feels like. So that's what I'll be sharing with you now. And you can go ahead and share that, Josh. Thanks.
I'm still here. Why am I still here? I've left this place, or any place at all. I can't recall. Someone must answer for my suffering. A reckoning, I need it. Someone to answer for all my suffering. Even if it, like, not, yes to like around, I heard, like, right? Or like all of these voices, okay. Yeah, is it ghostly in a way?
It
Or
feels
is it?
like it to me. It feels like a dirge, like a plea or something.
Yeah.
Reckoning. Reckoning. I need it. Someone to answer all my suffering. Each time I blink, a week goes by, and another, and another, and another, another week down. I should feel freer.
Okay, hi.
The end of work, meaning we have a right to earn something from nothing. Then I kind of had to, well, okay. I think what I want is radical mutual aid.
Yeah, I think you're right that I actually don't know if you're right, that we need to receive something. But if you are right, it seems like payment has always been kind of fucked up.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what feels complicated about the exchange.
Yeah.
I also started off with burn money, appreciation of laziness, a value placed on rest and lounging. And then I threw in this Audre Lorde quote that I actually think whatever. Our labor has become more important than our, and I can't remember what that blank is. Blank. I just put blank because I can't remember what that word was, and it kind of is important. Our labor has become more important than our blank. Imagery of Black and brown children taught to love the span of their arms. Commercials of just rolling in the fields, maybe not commercials, maybe just videos of Black and brown bodies rolling in large fields. I don't know.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I just to keep it rolling, I'll just keep it rolling. So the next thing that that we'll play for you is a conversation that Gabrielle Civil and I had last week. Just to quickly introduce Gabrielle, because she and I can do a lot of talking, so I'll try to be brief. She's an amazing human being. I have her bio, I'll read the bio. Gabrielle Civil is a Black feminist, performance artist, poet, and writer originally from Detroit. Recent performances include Jupiter 2021, Vigil 2021, and Wild Beauty 2020. Her performance memoirs include Swallow the Fish, Experiments in Joy, Ghost Gestures, and The Deja Vu. A 2019 Rima Hortman LA Emerging Artist. She teaches at California Institute for the Arts. The aim of her work is to open up space. And I just want to say about Gabrielle, so she is like a beloved friend and co-conspirator. And of course, as it would happen, I wanted to talk with her because she writes about teaching in prison in a piece that she has in this really brilliant book called Experiments in Joy. She has like a series of prose under the title Discipline and Knowledge, Teaching at a Maximum Security Prison. And it opens, which I hadn't remembered, but this chapter opens with a series of ways that she polices her own body going into the prison. So starting with, I do not wear lipstick. I do not wear anything short or tight or even well-fitting. I do not show my arms or my legs. I wear white cotton over blouses, and so on. It goes on. I had completely forgotten that that's how this piece opens. I actually have my own poem that I've written, which is called my No poem, which is just a series of things I can't do when I go to prison. And I will just leave it at that. This is where we enter the conversation. So I'll let you take it away, Josh. Welcome,
Cool.
Gabrielle Civil.
I'm so thrilled and delighted to be here and to have some opportunity to just chop it up with you and be a part of this incredible program of thinking around captivity and freedom. These are terms I think, especially as a Black feminist performance artist and writer and teacher, or even just like a Black feminist, Black woman, Black femme, freedom and captivity as terms are just huge to my whole subjectivity and consciousness. So I'm so excited to have a chance to dip in
so briefly, because
dip in so briefly, but still just a little dip in.
Just a little dip, because I feel like actually this is just I guess this is like an aside or a little footnote to this, is that I think that actually something that I talked about when Colby first approached me about this was I was kind of thinking about, really at that time, it was like earlier in the pandemic, much earlier. And I was sort of like, well, I want to actually think through how the systems that we're already using sort of replicate a lot of carceral logic, including the fact that, you know, this whole format, I mean, this is lovely. I'm really happy to talk with you. And also, as you just said, as a human being with your body and your life, you are thinking about this all the time.
Right.
And I am too. And so actually trying to create moments that are like breaks away from real life, where we have this special programming where we do this for, you know, 45 minutes or an hour, is not actually, doesn't actually make any sense. It doesn't make any sense, because this is actually like seeping through the pores, right?
Ooh, and what you just said right there, that image seeping through the pores, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, when I'm thinking about, I mean, and we'll get into some of the specific questions I feel like we've been meditating on in preparation for this conversation, but I just want to begin by saying, when I'm thinking about freedom right now, so much in the context of a book I just recently finished called Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments by Saidiya Hartman. Have you read this, Martine?
No, but I know I need to.
Whoa. Because so much of that book is really around sort of the audacious logic that people who were not too long ago enslaved would have a right not only just to believe, or just would claim a right, not only to believe in their own capacity for freedom, but that they would take it upon themselves to pursue freedom from so many kinds of so many kinds of logics, you know, so really breaking free from a lot of Victorian mentalities about who gets to sleep with who and what does it mean to be married or not married, or maybe I have a husband and a wife or a girlfriend, you know, like just and to believe that you have a right for something better than what the world says that you have. And the way that that gets manifested is that you have like young women, girls, 14, 15, 16-year-old wandering in the streets and making a decision. Maybe I'll go on this street or that street, or maybe I'll become a dancer on the stage, and maybe I will take a lover, or maybe I will have two lovers, or maybe, you know, and saying like, I refuse to just be your maid.
Yeah.
There's something about that for me is amazing. And what Hartman is arguing is what is it in the subjectivity of these of people to say, I refuse to be it just in your own captive logic, and then the way that they get suffered, or the way they suffer for it, or the way that different laws come in specifically to try to police their bodies, specifically to try to get young women to do the kind of domestic labor that they didn't want to do anymore and felt like after slavery they shouldn't have to do. So all these laws are coming in to put you in the reformatory to make you go and basically be a maid. But these girls saying like, but I don't want to do that.
Right.
I'm free and I'm going to claim my right to do what I want, even if I suffer for it. There's something important to me. I'm trying to think a lot about that.
Well, I mean, it's, you know, I guess like that's, to me, then I'm like, so fundamentally there's, I mean, because what you're talking about is being alive.
Right.
You know? Like to imagine yourself alive, to imagine yourself as a person with a life, which is like a fundamentally liberatory, emancipatory practice that is that thing of seeping through the pores of just like the practice is just living. The practice is imagining yourself as a person who has the right to a life.
But it's also painful. I mean, I think that it's liberatory and it can lead to great pleasure or can open up to pleasure, but it also can lead to what it feels like to know that you are the only one who thinks of yourself as a person. That's painful. And sometimes there can be a desire to numb a part of yourself and to think of yourself, I'm think of yourself as a machine, or think of yourself as a drudge, or think of yourself as a cog in the wheel, or not think of yourself as a person because you can feel frustrated that the world doesn't see you that way.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of audacity and it takes a lot of endurance to continue to feel like a person, or to remember that you're a person in a world that is constantly dehumanizing you.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a loop there that can be hard to break.
Yeah.
Because we are people, we are living. And we want pleasure, we want touch, we want companionship, we want art, we want family and connection. And then if we're in a world that's really pretty intent on denying us quite a lot of those things, it can be hard to still keep trying for them, even though as human beings, it's in our nature to continue.
Well, as usual, I have to do my reference back to the terrible movie Hell's a Poppin', which I know I've talked with you about before, but there's one, and it's on my mind too, because I just had a conversation with an artist and curator here, Kat Reynolds, and we were talking about that film. I think we were watching it together. Not the film, but the clip inside Hell's a Poppin'. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay, this is it's not really worth watching the film. I forget when it comes up. Some like wash of time between the 40s and maybe late 50s or something that I can't. But there's one incredible scene. This is a film, it's the intended white audience. It is not a Black film at all. But there's one incredible scene where it's to me, hands down, one of the best scenes, like top 5 best scenes in a movie of all time, where all the help, the driver, the maid, the janitor, somebody sits down, I forget who it is, maybe the cook or somebody sits down at the piano and starts to pluck out a little note. And one of the other workers hears that, comes over and starts playing the bass. And then the maid hears it. And the other people are doing their, the gardener's doing what he's doing, and he hears it. And then they all come in. And the first part is they all start jamming just on the music. Like they're just having this somebody's playing the drums and they're just like, it's just great. I'm hearing it in my head right now. That's why, it's like this great, and everyone's just like getting together, getting it. And then all of a sudden they snap and they go into this like wildest Lindy Hop scene where people are literally being thrown and pulled back, thrown through their legs. People do multiple flips over people's backs. And they're in maid's outfits, like they're in saddle shoes and a maid dress. and it's like truly one of the best, it's absolutely one of the best dance scenes ever caught in film, I think. And just like an incredible scene in general. And then there's this one moment, so everybody broke away from their task. They're doing this just amazing, amazing, amazing dance. And then we see the main characters of the film, or some of the main characters, these white people are peek around the curtain and they're like getting a little eyeful and kind of enjoying it. And people keep dancing and they finally finish the dance and they're like laid out and they're just, happy and smiling. And they're like, I can't believe how crazy that was. And then the people around the curtain start applauding for them. And then all of a sudden, all these Black people in this room hear it. And it's like, it knocks them out of their, this reverie moment that they've been in. And they jump up and they run out and they run back to work. And that's the end of the scene. And it's like that. It's like the visualization, I think, of what you're describing, like this like, audacity and also compulsion. I think people are compelled to imagine themselves, And then to find that break where you get it, which is always momentary and fleeting, you know, and then realize the gaze and then and have to, you know, go back to what you were doing.
Well, I mean, and this is one of the questions in terms of what happens to that compulsion in an incarcerated situation.
Yeah.
If we as human beings are meant to, you know, imagine, that's part of the things that I think makes us amazing, which is not to say that other kinds of animals don't imagine. I mean, I think that probably dogs and cats and whales dream. You know, I don't know what those dreams are because I don't speak their languages, but I do think that one of the things that feels special, at least within my human experience, is imagination, and imagination relative to my own consciousness as well, that I can imagine things for my own life. I can imagine things that I might want to do, and that then links to possibilities of freedom. In an incarcerated situation, it's something to think about, like, and something to listen to incarcerated writers, artists, scholars about how it's worked for them. So much of the brutality of the conditions of incarceration confinement seem like, on the one hand, they're trying to push against certain kinds of imagination, but then sometimes it seems like it can open up a space for another kind of imagination. And I'm just curious if what your experience has been like around that push-pull in terms of, you know, incarcerated imagination.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think stepping back a little bit, you were talking before about the like pain of that work and, you know, the riskiness of that, or the need to like shut that down sometimes just for your own mental health or whatever. You're kind of taking care of your own soul or something. And I think that's, yeah, I mean, I feel like that is something that many of us, and probably all of us, and by us, I mean people who I talk to, experience, you know, like we have some kind of relationship to that, sort of shutting that piece down for our own self-protection. And then it really just gets concentrated and sort of focused, I think, in a prison situation. Because of what you're talking about with, well, this is what I think, because of what you're talking about in terms of the sort of like having lots of voices telling you ain't shit. And also I think because of that hell's a poppin' thing where you have this constant gaze, right? Mm-hmm. And it's actually like those workers know in that scene, they know that they're not really supposed to be doing that. And in fact, they don't even change, they don't even have a costume change. I feel like if Beyonce made that scene, there would be a full ass wig costume change, right? They don't have a costume change. They're literally in the cook's uniform. They are cooks doing those things, right? And I think, yeah, I mean, I feel like that's definitely a part of why that sort of thing happens that you're describing, that kind of self-protection thing. It does feel very profound. For me, it has felt very profound to be in a classroom situation with people doing, I guess, dance, but, you know, somatics type of work, and have that thing happen where people find that opening for me, it feels profound because I can see visibly, I can hear what they're saying, but I can also literally see on their bodies that is so, it's so layered. You know, Adrienne Piper has this new memoir that she just came out with, and she talks in the memoir about a child being this like sprout, and then you have over your life, you have these layers and layers and layers and layers, and the more layers you get, the harder it is to access that sprout, right? And the layers are just family and society and all the things that build up your career and all the things, right? And I feel like you can see that on people. Like you can see how close people are to that sprout feeling. And I feel like I've seen it with people I've worked with inside, where I see a moment or the moments where they're like, get in touch with that thing, that sprout thing or whatever it is, that thing, like there's like a channel to that thing. And it's like a visible, like they change. It's like an aura or physicality or something. I don't know, but it changes. I mean, I've seen it change. And I'm also like, we all know you can't leave this room like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
I can't leave the room like that, and I'm leaving the prison, but I know that room, like as soon as I go out where there's eyes, you know, it's not, you can't have that sprout all exposed like that.
Yeah, that's one of many hard things, I think, to try to wrap one's mind around. Like, I mean, to be able to come and do this work with people, incarcerated people, it's such a gift. It's such a privilege to be able to work with, you know, like people who I feel like are synthesizing a profoundly awful experience, but also are learning. There's a kind of knowledge, I think, that's being generated. And, or at least when I was teaching, the students I had were the best students I had ever had. So that was one thing that was interesting. And it was a little unnerving to think about how that extreme discipline of the prison produced these incredible students. And that goes along. I mean, I have a friend of mine who was just saying today, she has been a university professor and has said, like, you know what, that's a violent system. And there's some violences in terms of the structure of the discipline of the mind that really for her were about captivity and not freedom, let's say. But I saw something amazing in terms of, I mean, we were not allowed to do somatic anything in the structure that I was in, no. And in fact, it was really frowned upon. I don't even know if I was even allowed to touch any of my students, like even to shake a hand, like no. It was so strict what we could do, but I could see on the body, like when an idea came, like a eureka moment for someone, the kind of pleasure of that, and just all of a sudden, the kinds of connections, or when we were deeply engrossed in conversation, or when we were writing and then someone was reading what they wrote, it was really physically, you could see in the body a change that was happening. And it was so hard then to see for all of us, like, ooh, wrap that up, like before we leave, like, shut that part down, hide that, disguise that. But because really it was the walk from the classroom, like back out. It was really those correctional officers, like those officers right there. It was like, this is even 5 steps out of this room. They cannot see what has just happened because the potential tension or retribution or annoyance, like how come you get to have that here?
Oh, yeah,
that was a real thing.
Yeah, that's real. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that's interesting. I think that's definitely, I guess I hadn't really thought of it that way. I had thought of it more as like the witnessing is like it's actually important that you keep that part of yourself safe. You know, like that's like you don't really have you don't have anything that's really yours when you're incarcerated, except for what's inside of you. And so I think I had always thought of it more as like, that's something that you get to keep. But I think that's also, definitely that's also part of it too, is this sort of like weird, not weird, violent tension between the proximity, I think, of the officers or guards with the people that they're meant to be guarding. There's always this like, the tension. It's like something is too, there's like, I mean, I think something that I always feel, and I do want to make sure that we also talk about ourselves too, because I think that's actually, you know, that's what we have the most experience with. But something that I always feel is when you're talking about that walk, and I think about that walk from the classroom, but also that walk to the classroom, or the sort of entering the prison and then going into the classroom, that I always feel like this is a fucked up work environment. Like,
Oh, yeah.
like you all, for the officers, like you all, first of all, you work in a prison, and that sucks. But also, it's not a normal work environment. Like, it's not like if I go to the library, the librarian has a very clear task that they're meant to like support me with or whatever. My job as an educator, there's a fairly clear, although it's often murky, but generally there's a clear task of what I'm meant to be doing, and my relationship to the people that I'm servicing feels pretty well outlined to me. But around officers, I'm like, I don't really understand what is our relationship.
Right.
Like, I feel like there's a lot more feeling here than in any other sort of like two people doing a job interacting should have. And the same way that, you know, their job as the people who are meant to guard the people inside the prison is just a lot of, it's not clear to me. Like, I'm not sure that it's clear to them. I don't know, but I would guess it's not so clear to them what exactly is your relationship supposed to be here. Because there is a lot of feeling. There's like jealousy, there's anger, there's disgust, there's just like homie vibes.
Sure.
You know, all that stuff.
Curiosity, sort of
familiarity.
interest. Sometimes, I mean, I think what you said earlier, just even about seeping through pores, sometimes there's this strange affect that's sort of coming off of the interaction that seems excessive to what's actually happening. Like, you're being escorted from one site to another site, but then there's this other feeling or something
Whole
that's
other
also,
feeling. Yeah. Whole other feeling. It's deep. It's like, why is this happening? Because we're literally just walking together.
Right.
There actually doesn't need to be this much. I mean, and this is why I also always go into like, what is this architecture doing to us?
Right.
You know, how does us just literally being in this space together, two people with the bodies that we both have and the experiences wrapped up in those bodies, how is architecture's impact on us being here together kind of dictating the way that we interact with each other?
That's a huge piece. And also, what are we supposed to be feeling right now? And are we supposed to be feeling right now?
What?
Are we supposed to be feeling anything? Is feeling in and of itself like a problem here? Because feeling, I mean, and is part of the punishment of incarceration, an attempt to numb or an attempt to circumvent feeling. I mean, because there used to be an idea of rehabilitation, but it seems like that's just gone by the wayside. Or maybe, I don't know. I mean, I saw this other film called The Artist and the Thief. I don't know if you've seen that. I actually loved that. No. And it takes place in Scandinavia. And there's a guy who's just struggling with addiction. And one night he and his friend, they come in and they just break into a gallery and they steal some paintings, and they're so loaded that that one of them is like, I don't even remember what we did with the paintings. And the artist is like, you know what? I just want my painting back. I spent a year on this. I want my painting back. And he's like, I really don't know where it is. And then she says, okay, I want to paint you. And the documentary is all about sort of their relationship, getting to know one another, her. And, you know, when you're painting, you're seeing and talking, and it also flips because then he sees her and there's a whole situation. But at one point, you know, his struggles with addiction kind of come back and he ends up being incarcerated. And I believe it's in Norway. I have never seen, Martine, anything. When I saw just what that prison was like, my mind was blown. It was beautiful. He was like taking walks in nature. he had therapy. And it was just like, and it was like, I mean, it just was a completely different, the whole thing was like, what's happened to you and what's going on with you, that this is where you've ended up. We as a society, we want to really help you figure it out and help you. And it was just the beauty. He had his own room. There was a window. I mean, now it's true, they locked the door. Okay, so it wasn't, but there was still so much freedom of movement. And it was an interesting thing just to think about, like, I don't know, what can prison be? Does it have to be, you know, like if you're an abolitionist, which I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not quite there yet. Most of my friends are hardcore abolitionists, but I grew up in Detroit where there was crime. And I think a lot about, I just think a lot about how crime structured our everyday life, like where we could park, or, you know, your before cell phones, like saying, I'm going to get back to the house at X time so that you can stand and watch me walk from the car to the house. We were not even living in our neighborhood. It was like gorgeous, full of trees. I mean, but that sense of like how it was structuring our movement, this idea of crime, who were the criminals? They were people like us, you know, I mean, so I struggle to try to think about what alternatives are or should be. But I feel like I'm in the conversation and I'm invested in something different than what we have here, which is deeply and profoundly unjust in terms of a criminal justice system and a prison system. But I struggle to really figure out, like, okay, so what should we do?
Yeah. Well, that's a whole another conversation.
It is actually.
That I actually want to have with you, and maybe that's just part of our ongoing thing.
Yeah.
When I see you in person. Because I think, I mean, for me, I feel like, yeah, I feel like knowing that something is deeply wrong and being in the work of imagining something else feels like that's what it is to me. And also kind of being aware of all the unknowns, like being aware that you don't know, actually you are struggling and you don't know, but you want to imagine. That kind of feels like the work of abolition to me.
Radical imagination.
Yeah, that feels like what it, you know, in the same way that like what we started this conversation talking about, you know, people, when you're talking about Saidiya Hartman's book and people sort of imagining themselves as dancers on a stage or something, that to me is, you know, whether or not that person is an abolitionist, I think that's abolitionist practice for sure, you know.
But to tolerate the feeling of uncertainty, that's what I mean, that sometimes feeling is hard. It's hard to feel, and it can be easier to shut things down and say, like, this is just the world it is what it is. This is the world that we live in. Figure out how to deal with it. I mean, I just think that I received a lot of messages growing up, like, you know, the game is the game. You just need to know how to play it. Why are you trying to think? I mean, and as a poet and as a maker of performance, obviously on a deep level, I was like, no, we have to imagine new possibilities. But it is hard to think about living in uncertainty.
It is hard.
And so I have a lot of admiration and love for people who are like you, who are living within that and embracing that uncertainty as a practice of freedom. I think that that's what it is. And I feel like that's what I'm trying to move towards. But then I also want to be honest. Like, I think that's one thing I feel like coming from Detroit and then looking at let's say the prosecutor, there was an election for a new, you know, like, what is it? The person who prosecutes in a town. What is the name of that person? Is it just like the city prosecutor or the district attorney or whatever it is? And it seemed like this was an opportunity for maybe a more progressive person to come in. Detroit is predominantly Black city. The judges are Black, you know, like the lawyers are Black, criminals are Black, victims are Black. So it's an interesting dynamic. And some of the arguments around white supremacy relative to incarceration, or, you know, I think that intellectually that all works, but literally for a lot of people, it was like, what are you even talking about? Everybody involved here is Black. So then that was something that was a little different. Had a friend in Atlanta who said a similar thing, where he said he had never even seen a white police officer before growing up. They all were Black. So that his whole sense of that was different. But anyway, this is just to say, like,
yeah,
you know, like that some of the logics, I mean, it's just, there's some regional things that are happening in terms of how people live and how people connect. And I want to be more honest about what I feel like in my spirit and my heart, what I want to believe in, and then also where I have reservations. Sometimes I feel like in the communities that I'm in, there's this idea that we all already have gotten to a certain place, that we all already agree, that we all already know, and that then we can be surprised when something splinters or fractures, because maybe not everybody was there, you know?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you, Gabrielle. I really appreciate that a lot. I think that, yeah, I mean, I guess for me, like one of the, what abolitionist practice, I guess what that feels like for me, it feels a lot of times like out of the blue, realizing that that's what's happening. That's actually what it feels like for me the most. As somebody who's like, my main gig is I teach at the Art Institute, and I also make art that operates in a lot of different spaces, including theaters and galleries, right? So I don't identify as an activist, although I lend myself to activism at times. And I'm not an organizer. My main gig is actually fairly institutional. So for me, what that abolitionist practice, I think that's what it is, abolitionist practice. It feels like lots of moments where I realize that that is what is happening. Like a moment where, like even this conversation right now, where you're saying this thing about like being actually like really in dialogue about where we are all at. And I'm hearing that and I'm like, oh, that actually feels more authentically in the practice of abolitionism than assumptions about how we all got here, we're all here and we all know how we got here. But to actually be present with our own lives, where we grew up and all of this stuff, the way that our ideas formulated and all this stuff. So I mean, I think that it actually does feel like something for me that is much more like these moments that just sort of occur, and then having the second to be like, oh yeah, that's why I'm feeling so strongly about this, because I don't actually believe that people can be thrown away, or I'm noticing that this is like really exciting to me, like that, like Hell's Poppin' is really exciting to me, because I actually believe that people have freedom living inside of them.
Right.
Like, oh my God, it's so hard to not, I'm like, wait, I want to add to that point.
That was so wonderful. Martine and Gabrielle and Abstentia, thank you both so much. What a wonderful set of provocations, and, you know, the seeping, feeling the sprout, so many also images that are so deeply evocative, and I think in such a beautiful and generous way took up our open-ended prompt, you know, what does freedom feel like? Apologies, there might be a bit of a delay with my movement and audio. So I am going to read out some questions we've received from our audience, and I hope, Martina, will be mostly you talking. The first question I wanted to ask, actually, or no, I saw you unmute yourself.
Can I just say one thing? This happens to me sometimes. I tend to like, if you read me something that I wrote or play me something that I said, I'll like disagree and argue with myself. I just want to intervene on my last point before we cut out and say that I actually don't fully agree with what I'm saying there. I think that I think that's a part of what this idea of abolitionist practice, that's a part of it, is having this sort of insight to reflect and be like, oh, as I was saying. But I also think that it's intentional. Like, I think that's something that I didn't name there, or maybe we cut it off before I did. But I think also abolitionist practice can and should be very intentional, that you do feel drawn towards things or compelled to make action or say or do things because you have the intentions, not just that you happen to notice that you're doing things because you hold these beliefs. So I just feel like that's an important piece that I didn't name in that. So that's all. Questions?
Wrapping that up. Yeah, I mean, the first question I wanted to ask, which maybe is one way of continuing actually what you were just saying right now. I wonder if you could talk more about the role that collaboration or collectivity or conviviality plays in your art practice and your methodologies, as well as your abolitionist practice. I know, I mean, in some ways it's so wonderful and such a treat to be able to watch you and Gabrielle in conversation. And as I was listening to you both talk, it struck me the importance of, or underscored, right, and the importance of that type of conversation or that type of collaboration. I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel like I'm really deepening my understanding for myself of how I feel about collaboration in my work. I love working with people, and I also hate working with people. And I love collaboration, and I also hate it sometimes. And I think that I'm kind of actually right now really interested, just like in this moment in the last few years, really interested in what being a director can mean. And I mean that in that I'm realizing, in like, embarrassingly to me, I'm realizing now at this point in my work, in my career, that what they told us was being a director doesn't work for most people, especially not Black people, and especially not Black women. It doesn't work. It's actually really violent for the most part. The model of a director, and also the model of an artist, is really problematic. It's really capitalist, and it's based on privilege. And I think that there's just, like, having been educated in a particular way, and also like lived in a particular culture, and sort of there's just these things that I've assumed about what it means to make art and direct that really have to do, that are actually very punitive and very carceral in a lot of ways, that are really about not having space for divergence, even in the context of improvisation, that there's time and place for improvisation, but there's actually not time and place for improvisation outside of the studio or outside of these hours of the studio. Yeah, it is not the idea of what a director or what an artist is does not really hold very much space for multiplicity or multitudinousness. And I am wondering if I thought of myself years ago as more of a collaborator, as somebody who loves collaboration all the time, because actually, not because so much I loved collaboration, but because deep inside myself, I knew that I didn't like what this artist director thing was. And I thought that then there's like this other type of it that means that you're just collaborative, which is great. I mean, I love the idea of collaboration. I just don't always want to do it. But what I do want to do is be able to, at least at this point right now, and with the work I'm doing right now, I want to be able to work with people that allows space for me to not know and not have capacity, and also allows for everyone else to not know and not have capacity, and also allows for the places where people have much more skill and it's not even about skill, joy in doing something, that there's actually lots of room for that to just thrive, and I can step back. And that can be a type of being a director or co-director. Yeah, so I feel like I'm learning what collaboration is, because yeah, or maybe I'm just like learning that none of these terms, I don't even care about these terms, but I don't know. Is that an answer? That's like a roundabout answer.
No, that was wonderful. And I think some other questions that are coming in might circle us back in different ways to sort of pressing against some of these accepted terms that circulate in the art world or in academia. But the next question I wanted to ask is, you've talked about feeling as both evasive of or exceeding discipline, but also as a thing that then becomes heavily policed. Can you talk about how or if your creative processes, when you work on specific projects, help you navigate this dynamic, this evasiveness, this exceeding discipline, and then also the policing as well as feelings?
Yeah, I just generally have I make dances, but I wasn't trained as a dancer in the way that we usually think of that. So I come to dance through I don't know, through dancing at parties and taking dance classes, but also through like being a very emotional child, through, like spending a lot of time in the woods behind my parents' house as a kid. There's all these different ways that are actually more rooted in just somatics that are my way into dance. Also just being a young queer person living in the Bay Area, in the aughts, is part of my way into it too, which there's just a culture there. There was, it's, of course the Bay is changing so much, but there was and is a culture there of this kind of convergence of nightlife culture, more like formal dance, even proscenium dance culture, and also queer, just being queer, circus culture. There's like an interesting kind of mashup there. So that's how I come to dance. So for me, this idea of like working through different states and movement meditation and somatics and these different kinds of things are my way into making this work. So I feel like for me, that's kind of finding ways to sort of use connection to my body and my feeling and my body with others as a way to feel more alive and also to feel more free, and also feel covertly free, are just sort of part of the life practice that brought me into the creative work that I make, or the art work, I should say, that I make. But I feel like there's another piece of that question. Now the question's gone away, so I can't see it. But I think I want to also say too that this work that I'm working on right now, which is this opera, it's been really well supported by a range of foundations and institutions, including some that are not explicitly really have anything to do with, certainly not prison abolition, and not even necessarily explicitly affiliated with sort of supporting incarcerated people or anything like this, and they're certainly not like activist organizations or anything, and very white foundations have supported this project. And it's been interesting to me to navigate I am thinking, I mean, in my work in general and with Force, the opera, I'm thinking a lot about visibility and surveillance and dark surveillance and covertness. And it's been interesting to navigate that in the context of sometimes being physically present with this work, which is all Black folks and almost all Black women and femmes, being present with this work in really white spaces. I don't really know how that, I mean, I think it's been interesting. I think I'm learning about it as we go through it. It's felt safe so far because I think we have the numbers. So it feels like good and safe and like we're showing up. But I think that there's more for me to understand there, and I'm sort of learning as we go.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that makes me return to, I think, some of what you were sharing at the start of our time together about the architectural structure of the piece itself. And as you were talking, I was just thinking yet again about the powerfulness of that black box and how you were describing that to us. I want to move to another question that we got from the audience. And the writer begins, I'm struck by the idea that perhaps there are some imaginations that shouldn't be tamed, bounded, restricted. At the same time, it occurs to me that these unrestricted imaginations are where a person expands beyond the carceral logic of the prison/state, pointing to what freedom and abolition may look like. So how do we learn to listen /hear/see/acknowledge the unbounded imaginations without naming it, because of the danger that naming it might actually be an act of violence? And maybe in some ways, actually, this picks up with some of what you were just saying, Martine.
Yeah, thank you, Raksha, for that question. And I wish that we could actually just have a conversation. Maybe we will just have a conversation about this. Because it's such a good question. And God, I feel like that is like that's like, to me, actually like the hard stuff in abolitionist dialogue. And I feel right now where I'm at in my life, I don't feel like we all need to listen, hear, see, acknowledge all unbounded imaginations. That doesn't actually feel safe or correct to me. I do think there needs to be space for people to unbind themselves. But I don't think that we all need to be present or witness for that. Some people can be, and some of us should not be. And having said that, and this idea of like unbinding your imagination, I also just think that, we use this term policing like very flippantly, but there's a difference between policing yourself and just being accountable, right? Like you can be accountable, and it means to the people around you, and it means that you're not sharing everything on your mind, and you're actually just doing some work. You recognize you need to do some work, right? That doesn't mean you're policing yourself. That's not what policing is. Policing is not accountability. They're different things. So I guess and part of that I think is like, I'm always really interested just in life. I'm always really interested in this idea of the unknown, and that the unknown being a really exciting place. Like, to me, that's a really fun place to be, and also sometimes scary, but mostly fun. But I also think that, doing the work to sort of be aware of when you need to unburden your unknowingness on your community, and when actually like exploring your unknowingness with yourself or your mom or your, whoever the people that you can do that with safely. That to me is different than policing yourself, but it is really important to just kind of know that. I mean, you can do that, but I don't think everyone needs to do that with everyone all the time.
I think we have time for a few more questions. So this is one that came in sort of midway through our talk. And the writer begins, on the topic of freedom, what do you think about child imprisonment?
Well, well, actually, the question as I'm reading it is, what do you guys think about child imprisonment? Which I assume means it's a question for everybody here, but I'm the only one unmuted, so I'll answer it. I think that actually the question is more like, what is a child? Like, do you believe that a child exists in prison? Because I don't. I don't think that's what a child is. I mean, what is a child? The questioner, I think their name is Megan. What is a child in your mind? Like, is a child someone who feels loved, who feels like they have a future, who feels like they can make mistakes and it's still safe? They feel like there's someone who has more to learn and they're being encouraged to do that learning and growing, that they get to grow and they're being encouraged to grow. Are they someone who feels free? I think everyone should read that Adrian Piper memoir. Maybe not the whole book, because it gets turns into a little, it gets to be a downer. You got to be prepared for the whole thing, but at least the first few chapters, because that's the whole thing. Is she's like, what is a child, that sprout that feels like it can grow and it is growing? That's what a child is, but not everyone gets access to that. And so for me, if you think that that's what a child is, and you think that to be an adult human, you need to have a childhood, then I don't know how you can feel that children should be in prison. They, in fact, can't exist in prison. It's actually fundamentally illogical. It doesn't make any sense. So, but I mean, I think that's a question for everyone here to be discussing.
And I'm struck as you were talking, Martine, both that it reminds me of what you were saying earlier, dismantling these categories of the artist or director for us, and also within asking us to think about the category of the child, also unraveling the conditions for any person to be imprisoned as you go through, right? How we might understand that term child. So another question, being situated in institutional structures, how have you navigated this comfortably, yet don't consider yourself an activist? Is it linked to comfortability?
I think, so how have I navigated being situated in institutional structures? Thank you for this question. It's not very comfortable. I don't feel comfortable. I don't know. I don't like calling myself an activist because I feel like people do that, and it feels like demeaning, or not demeaning, but it just feels inappropriate because I don't think I really do that. I think I'm an artist, and I do sometimes, well, let me also say, I don't want to disrespect people who do that work, which feels very different in like a labor intensive way. Like the labor is quite different from what I do. But I also probably say that too, because I really like the freedoms that being an artist and not an activist offer me. That I don't have to have a goal. I don't really have goals when I make work. I don't have like a win. Like I won't know if I win with my work. And that's a freedom that I get as an artist. So I think that's part of why I say that. But sorry, that's not your question. The question about the institutional structures, yeah, it's really difficult. I don't feel comfortable. I don't know how any of us are navigating it. I think it's why there's a lot of people going crazy in higher education. And I'm chuckling because I don't know why. It's not funny. This is real. People are losing their minds in higher ed. And it's not comfortable for many of us. You know, I think it's like really an impossible, it's set up to become impossible for a lot of us. And I think many of us, you know, what looks like hyper productivity or like we're really successful is actually just like us trying really hard to make it through something that really does not want us to be ourselves and to be present, does not want us to be present, actually. But it's not comfortable. I really don't think it's, I honestly, I don't think, I'll just speaking for higher education, I don't think it's comfortable for most people. I don't, you know, I just don't think it is. It's, yeah. But, you know, we're navigating it. I mean, I don't know if we're navigating it. We're here, we're trying. I don't even know if I'm interested in navigating it so much. I mean, yeah, let me not say this on Zoom. That's the end of my answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, it also, as you were talking earlier, again about the category of the artist or the director and the violences of those terms, I was thinking about, you know, museums, right, as another institution, or, you know, programming theater spaces, right, that also facilitate artistic practice to happen. And similarly thinking, right, there's so many parallels between those spaces and the ones you and I and so many of us on the Zoom this evening find ourselves temporarily or maybe perhaps longer term situated in, and the ways that those institutions delimit our movements, right, allow improvisation to happen in the studio, not in other spaces, and ways to press or challenge against those. We are at time.
Oh, can I say one more thing? I'll say one more thing. So yes, this, because you just made me think of this one. So I think the thing for me, when I think of navigation, I think of like a boat on a river. Like, I feel like then I am the boat and I'm surrounded and I'm just like trying to get through the thing, which feels like I don't like that. I don't like the way that my agency is set up in that situation. But I do think, to your point, Gwen, in these various institutions, I actually think, like, for many of us, what we're actually trying to do is use those. We're trying to use them. We temporarily, as you say, we find ourselves in some kind of relation or proximity to them, and it can be a really amicable. You know, it doesn't have to be like all violence all the time. It can be actually, we can love our colleagues or love the curators we work with or whatever it is. But there's something that we're actually trying to like wrangle from that and use for this other purpose that feels different than just bobbing through until you get to some end that you can't see.
Yeah, I think that's such a lovely note to end on. It reminds me, right, of I think what you've been emphasizing throughout the talk, this importance of a feeling state that is so dependent on being in relationality with others, and that those become touchstones to mobilize a kind of politics, right? You know, that might be extracting or using resources from a given institution, but also offer, right, these other ways into a set of imaginations or a set of visions for a different type of future. Thank you so much, Martine. This has been just, for me, and I'm sure for everyone on the Zoom, a really wonderful and beautiful and generative hour and a half. So thank you so much for taking time. Thank you for finding time before we gathered to meet with Gabrielle and bring that conversation to us all. It was really wonderful.
It's great to have an excuse to chat with Gabrielle always. Thank you. This has been it's been lovely to just get to reflect and think with you all. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Stay well, everyone still on the call, and I hope you can join us for future Mondays as the programming series continues. And look out for Force, also an opera in 3 acts.
Yeah, and I also put in the chat the link to, Gabrielle has a whole project called Black Motion Pictures that she and I had a conversation, but there's several, it's a really great series. There's several other artists and designers and writers who are part of that. So check that out as well for the audio.
Amazing. Thank you all. Thank you again, Martine. Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone. Have a good night.